Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 381 of the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Renner. The show notes are located at StrengthCoachPodcast.com. All right, today on the StrengthCoach.com and NBSC.TV, Coach's Corner spoke with Coach Boyle about why keeping athletes and clients healthy is being misconstrued as creating fragility. It's actually from a tweet he had. We're going to also talk about his thoughts on why he feels like having a better VO2 max should not be a priority for athletes. Obviously, you might guess it has something to do with speed. For the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, I have on Coach Josh Henkin. He's the co-creator of the Ultimate Sandbag, of DVRT, and the new course, Low Back Pain, Pelvic Control. It's a 6-week online masterclass starting on June 11th with Perform Better, so I'll give you some details about that in a minute. We talked about the new science of low back pain, what the industry gets wrong about chronic low back pain, what he calls social media science, the biopsychosocial model, what that means and how we can use it, what research is showing about back pain. We talked about predictive coding and what that means and how the brain factors into all of this. The role of core stability in back pain, have we overplayed it? That and so much more, including his 6-week course. It starts on June 11th. You can still sign up for it. You can check the link at strengthcoachpodcast.com. We're going to talk all about it at the end of the interview as well. Highly recommended what Josh and his wife Jessica are doing, or just they're getting such great feedback from all the courses they are doing with Perform Better as well. So check that out at strengthcoachpodcast.com. For the Naamly Maximizing the Member Experience segment with Sumit Seth, Sumit's going to talk about simplifying to multiply, and he's going to use the acronym D.E.A.D, believe it or not, to help you understand what you should focus on. Really good one from Sumi. All right, Perform Better has the functional training summits. They've started. Orlando just passed. They had a great summit there. Chicago's coming up June 27th to 29th. LA is in August 1st to the 3rd, and then Providence, August 22nd to the 24th. You can check out my interview with Chris Poirier about the new format, including new presenters, the kickoff session on Thursday, and a new networking and Q&A session they're doing all day, and the fact that there's no more Sundays. So you can check all that out at PerformBetter.com. Lots of things to get to. So let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, guys, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com and NBSC.TV Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 7 days for free. You can also try out NBSC.TV for free for 7 days. That's where you're basically a fly on the wall at NBSC. You got staff meetings, programs, seminars, and in-services from top coaches. Check it all out at NBSC.TV or StrengthCoach.com. Coach, how you doing?
I am doing well. How are you?
All right. I see you've been busy. I mean, you just got back. We're going to talk about a minute from Perform Better, the Orlando Summit. And then I know were you in, was it New Hampshire for the women's hockey finals, or was that in Boston?
That was Lowell. So that was in Mass.
Oh, okay. How did that go? Because I know there was some discussion on, interesting. I wasn't planning on talking about this actually, but there's some talk about the referees and like hitting and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
Your thoughts are not a good idea.
Terrible, truthfully.
Why?
It's a way more physical game, which is okay, but it's incredibly inconsistent in terms of, I don't think the referees actually know what the rules are supposed to be right now for women's hockey. So you get a lot of interference. So you have people checking non-puck carriers and they don't call interference. So it's going to take them. I mean, the good thing is the product is still pretty good. It's really fun to watch, but the bad thing is they're struggling a little bit with, okay, what are the rules and how do we call these games based on the rules as they are. I don't know. I was going to say as they're written. I don't know if they're already written rules right now in terms of what, because they've clearly made checking legal where there was no checking. Technically, there was. I think what they said they allowed incidental contact. So if players made contact with each other where the intent was not to check, then that was acceptable. Now checking is clearly acceptable, but that's resulted in uncalled hits from behind, and like I said, lots of interference. So it's a work in progress.
Ideally, they would just kind of go with the NHL rules almost, right? I mean, it's a pro league. Go with NHL rules and be consistent. And we have,
Well, the problem with that
right?
is then you're allowing, because even in the NHL rules, the open ice hitting is the problem when you start looking at injuries and concussions
Okay.
and a lot of that stuff. So that's the thing that they're not like. You can't line somebody up and run them. And so I think but then it's sort of everything but that seems to be kind of legal. And I don't think it should go to that because there are other people saying, oh, they should have fighting too. And I'm like, I don't want to watch women hockey players fight. And I don't particularly want to watch somebody because what will happen, the women's game is a really kind of like soccer. They talk about the beautiful game. The women's game is a much better game to watch because you can't just be an idiot and run around and hit people and be effective, which to some degree you can in the NHL. Like if you're somebody who's just a pest and finishes their checks, and it really there's not much of that in women's hockey because it doesn't transfer as well. And I think in some ways they'd be pushing the game backwards with the idea because they don't need fan appeal. I don't think the game is appealing to fans because it's more physical. I think the game is appealing to fans because they have the best players and people want to see the best players. So they've done a really good job of getting people in the buildings. So there's a little bit of work that needs to be done now, I think, in terms of figuring out what the rules actually are.
Nice. Yeah, it's work in progress as always. Good stuff. Like you tweeted, how is trying to keep athletes and clients healthy misconstrued as creating fragility? Where did this come from? And kind of expand on it.
So it was basically, I don't know if you followed it, but I ended up being the subject of a meme by a guy named Austin Yoakum, who's a young strength coach, and then he posted basically a YouTube debate in which I was not present, where he kind of debated me philosophically, but I wasn't there, which I thought was strange. And it was but one of his claims is that people like me encourage fragility because we say don't do dips and don't do back squats and don't and the idea is that I think by us trying to be more intelligent about training, we then get accused of this. I don't, I don't know what the word is, but it's very much encouraging fragility. I think is what was used in the episode that I listened to. So I just think it's strange that when you try to be intelligent about something or even protective, I don't have a problem with being protective. I don't think being protective of people in training and saying, hey, we're going to try to choose techniques that we think have the lowest chance of injury. I don't think that is saying people jump to the next level, which is, oh, you're making everybody afraid to work out. It's like, we're not making anybody afraid to work out. If you come in our gym and watch, everybody's working out. Nobody's afraid. Nobody's worried about getting hurt. We're just simply, it's just, I think, a philosophical disagreement in terms of, I always talk about the idea of risk benefit. We look at the risk of something, we look at the potential benefit of something, and then maybe we look at something. Hey, is there another exercise that maybe mitigates that risk slightly where we can look at this and say, oh, there's less risk if we do it this way. There's less risk if we do a one leg squat than if we do a two leg squat. And again, is a two leg squat bad? No, but at some point, I think the compressive loading becomes a factor and the shear and the torque and all that stuff becomes a factor. And people do begin to have back pain. So I just was curious that I sort of throw it out to the universe and let's see what people's thought process is.
Yeah, I think you said it just now. I was thinking it is really just come to the gym. I mean, I watch some of the videos don't even look at what you're like when you're showing Mark do a single leg squat. Look in the background. Everybody's working hard. You got people doing pull-ups, people doing cleans, right? I mean, people are working hard there. People are, doing sprints. We're talking. It's kind of funny that people make these assumptions based on just a little bit of knowledge and say, oh, you're doing X, Y, and Z when they've really never been in your facility. They never really did a deep dive into your programming. And I could see if it was somebody who interned with you and said, no, I don't like it. This is my opinion of that. But most of the time, it's just somebody who is going off of your tweets.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's part of the problem. I always think people should look and think, okay, well, it was interesting because there was one that we did about not needing speed coaches, and somebody commented, oh, I guess track coaches are out now. And I'm thinking, no, you didn't. If you actually listen, what they listen to usually is your tease or Pat
Sure.
Beat's tease,
Yeah.
somebody throwing a soundbite out there. And the soundbite is designed to get somebody to go listen to the entire episode.
Sure.
That's the idea. But what ends up happening a lot on the internet is people just react to the soundbite instead of thinking, oh, let me go listen to that episode of the podcast. Because what I said about the speed coach thing is that it's more important that you're timing than it is that you're doing technical work. That was the point of, so I don't necessarily need somebody to try to teach me how to run better as much as I need somebody who has a timer and that we can go out and run against the timer. So yeah, I think there's a lot of that, particularly, and I guess maybe more so as it applies to me, because I just think there's a lot of people who want to disagree with me and want to dislike me. It's trendy, particularly among the kind of younger, I hate to say meathead crowd, but I guess the younger meathead crowd really likes to dislike people like me who are maybe saying, hey, they might be a better, safer way to do this.
Yeah. It's either the meathead or the evidence, completely, strictly evidence based, right? Only
Yes.
crowd that gets a little angry.
I don't appeal to a lot of crowds.
Yeah. Um, Coach, I found this. It's kind of wanted you to expand on the Tim Kettering post as well. He said Tomlin and Wagner in 2001 found that athletes with a higher VO2 max recovered more quickly and had more consistent 40-meter times than athletes with a lower VO2 max. So basically, a strong relationship between aerobic fitness and aerobic response to repeated bouts of high intensity had been established, suggesting that aerobic fitness is important in determining the magnitude of oxidative response. And what does it mean? Tim basically was talking about that aerobic system supports recovery for the next high level intensity effort. It also means that fitter athletes stay faster longer. So, I mean, do you feel like, okay, as long as I get them fast, we don't have to work on that aerobic system? Because you did kind of disagree with this kind of notion. You said, hey, getting fast takes long, getting fit does not take that long.
Right. Well, I guess my problem, and it's really interesting. I'm starting to work on Functional Strength Coach 8 because I think there's a lot of good new topical stuff that's out there. And one of the things that I always, that I, or not that I always talk about, but that I started to talk about as I was sketching out this idea is the idea that those who don't know history will tend to repeat it. And what people don't understand, and I like Tim, I've had breakfast with Tim a couple times,
It was awesome.
and he is a pro conditioning person. He is a very pro aerobic development person. And I am not an anti conditioning person as much as I am really pro speed. So if I'm going to prioritize, it's like the idea is that I always say, I used to tell my hockey guys all the time because we were all about getting fast and we had some of the fastest guys in the NHL for a really long time. And I said, it doesn't matter if you always almost get to the puck. The only guy that matters is the guy that wins the race. And it's a game of possession. Soccer the same way. It's a game of possession. The fact that you can repeatedly perform over and over again doesn't matter if you don't win those races. So when we look at sport is very much in hockey, it's 50-50 puck. In soccer, it's 50-50 ball, whatever it is. But There's always that version in every sport. And my thing is the most dominant person in sport is not the best conditioned person. It's the fastest person. If you look at that, and I always say to people, I've seen this across lots of sports where the literal, hey, speed kills. If you watch McDavid, there's a reason why McDavid just blows by people. If you watch the Carl Crawford, if you watch Jacoby Ellsbury, if you watch everywhere, there's just example after example after example. Even in lacrosse, like we found our national team players are generally faster than those that aren't. Look, hockey, our national team players are generally faster than those that aren't. It's just speed really matters. So I just think people want to prioritize what's valuable to them or what they perceive to be valuable. Whereas I don't have that. I don't have any emotional attachment to any of these things. I just think I always think, and I've said this numerous times, it takes a really long time to get fast, but you can get in shape in about 6 weeks. And Tim disagreed. Oh, the whatever. I forget what he referred to some benefit, and it takes a really long time. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think we have not had trouble getting people in shape, good enough shape to play the game.
Yep.
But our priority is always on speed. And I go back to the history thing. People forget that when I started, football players, our offensive linemen had to run 1.5 miles for time. And I always worry that we're going to swing the pendulum back too far. So I always kind of push the pendulum back towards the speed. It's like I remember my NHL guys when I started, I had to talk guys out of being on the bike 45 minutes 5 times a week because that's what they were being told by their exercise physiologists. Teams were hiring physiologists, not strength coaches. So they would literally go and hire a guy out of an ex-phys lab whose only objective was to raise players' VO2 maxes. And to do that, they did just boatloads of long, slow aerobic training. So I'm pushing back on this stuff because I think if we look at, A.P.E and some of this stuff, zone 2, everybody really wants to try to make what I think is the secondary thing the main thing. So,
Yeah, well, A.P.E really shouldn't come into this discussion because we're talking about athletes. He's talking about longevity and health span, right? I mean, so VO2 max is obviously an important thing.
but no, A.P.E, you mean, yeah.
Yeah,
But I think,
P. Yeah,
right. But Tim is talking about
yeah, I got it.
sport.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I think, and that's what I mean. I think sometimes the wires get crossed. Like I think
Mhm.
absolutely, the average person raising their VO2 max is probably going to be really beneficial for them. I
Yep.
think for the average athlete, raising your VO2 max is probably not a really big deal. Think, I think if you have a VO2 max probably in the low 50s, you're fine.
Yep.
And I don't think you benefit with the amount of time that it takes you to say get to 60.
Yeah, Mike,
No.
what if you just thought, okay, I got, you know, let's take a Jack Eichel or whatever, somebody like, because you mentioned the last episode, he was one of the fastest guys off the ice as well. So, what if we get to him to a certain point and we say, okay, we can still maintain that speed. We're still timing sprints, but let's up the ante on the kind of zone 2, zone 3 stuff to increase VO2 max. Or really, you won't increase VO2 max uh, that way. You don't increase VO2 max with long, slow distance anyway. So maybe in that like zone 3 or zone 4,
And
right? Zone
that's the
4.
other right. That's the other problem is I always said, and I said this, I could go back to my earliest writings about hockey. The way to improve your VO2 max is to interval train anyway. So in some ways, it's a redundant point in terms of people saying, "Hey, we want you to raise your VO2, but we want you to do more intervals." And I'm not anti-intervals. I am very much anti-steady state. I don't think it's necessary. And I guess, and that's why I always just the problem with someone like reading Tim's tweets is people listen and people are going to think, "Oh, this is important." And then I think when they do that, you're slicing the pie, right? You got the same whatever it is, X number of hours a week. And if you start shifting that development more towards conditioning, You have to shift it away from something else. And I guess that's my issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, I guess, you know, they had more consistent 40-meter times, but who cares if they're slow? That's basically what you were saying. If those aren't great
That's my
times,
point.
who cares?
It doesn't matter if someone said more aerobic work resulted in the person being faster, then I'd be on the aerobic bandwagon.
Absolutely. Good stuff. All right, coach, we'll let you go. Appreciate you coming on. Thanks for
All
doing
right.
this, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Thanks, Ian.
Did you know that a dead ape is the secret path to profitability for your member experience and for your business? Welcome back to Naamly's Maximizing the Member Experience segment, where we delve into the strategies and tactics that elevate your business and helps you foster personalized connections at scale. I've now had the pleasure of spending time with hundreds, literally hundreds of gym owners, and I understand the myriad responsibilities gym owners juggle on a daily basis: attracting new clients, delivering exceptional service, managing staff, taxes, equipment, leases, rent, and handling unexpected challenges like a clogged toilet, trainer stealing your clients, someone canceling and asking for a refund, to writing down a nasty review. It's a never ending list. Amidst this chaos, the question that keeps bubbling up is, how do we manage this without burning out? That's the $1 million question to solve for as you go about your quest to build $1 million gym. Almost every single one of my gym owner friends has inquired about the same thing. Sumit, you've run a successful business. What do you see? Can you give me a way to cut through the clutter and help me focus on what truly moves the needle? And the answer to most of these questions is it depends. But the overall arching mantra, the concept, the path, the thing to focus on that I can share with you is simplify to multiply. Now, simplify to multiply is about making strategic choices that free up resources and focus on growth. And as an operations specialist who's gone through this exact journey in a different setting, and is currently doing this myself for Naamly, today I'm going to walk you through how to realistically implement that concept in your gym. Think of the ape, not the gorilla ape, but the acronym APE. A stands for assess. Just like you would with a client, a business strategy session, if you will. Take a moment to really look at your business processes. Which tasks are consuming most of your time? Are they directly contributing to member satisfaction or your bottom line? Do a time audit. P stands for plan. As the old adage goes, planning always helps, even though things rarely, if ever, go according to plan. Use what I call the D.E.A.D framework, where D stands for delegate. Who can you handle this task off to? Is there a staff member who can take over some responsibilities? Is there a vendor that you can give it to? Can you outsource it? E stands for eliminate. What processes are outdated or unnecessary? Perhaps there's paperwork that could go digital. A is automate. What repetitive tasks can be automated? For instance, can appointment reminders, check in texts, and staff reminders be automated to save time? And D, the last D, stands for do. What must you and only you, the gym owner, the CEO of your business, handle personally? This might include business relationship building, strategic planning, or sales or marketing. The E is execute, also known as take massive action, be an action taker. Now, knowledge is power only when you use it. The books and notes are no good if they just lie around. It's when we implement the learnings from those where the magic happens. With a clear plan, it's time to act. Make those changes, observe the effects, and adjust as necessary. It's about continuous improvement. Wow, this really does sound like a fitness assessment, doesn't it? It's almost like I did that on purpose. To make it even more simple and really help you etch it into your memory, remember the path to profitability is through simplification. And the way to simplify is through a dead ape. All right, then. This is Naamly, co-founder Sumit Seth. If you enjoyed this segment and are interested in getting more insights and resources on elevating your member experience and simplifying your processes and setting your business up for success, then go ahead and click on the link where this is hosted. Thank you.
All right, guys, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment. Today I have on Josh Henkin. He's been in the industry for 25 years. I remember early on, we've been doing this podcast 17 years. It coincided with strengthcoach.com, and Josh was a big part of what was sportspecific.com, which eventually turned into strengthcoach.com, and he was a big part of the forum there. And he's worked with so many different people in general fitness, post rehab, hospital wellness programs. Actually probably learned more from his own surgeries and rehabs, right, Josh? I mean, geez. And he's been educating in this industry for over 15 years. And the DVRT program, which is part of, if you've had any of the ultimate sandbags, it's not just a piece of equipment, it's a whole system and used all over the world. They're doing him and his wife, Jessica, are doing a webinar. They're doing a kickoff webinar with Perform Better, the new science of low back pain. And we're going to talk all about back pain today. And that's going to be June 11th. And we'll have links for that on the show notes. And that's going to lead into their low back pain, pelvic control 6-week online masterclass. So I wanted to get Josh on just to kind of go over some of this stuff, especially with some of the stuff lately that Dr. Stuart McGill was on Peter Attia's podcast, and there was a lot of backlash there. So first of all, Josh, thanks for doing this, bud.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you so much for having me. And thank you for dating me severely with the sportspecific.com reference, right? I
know.
That instantly takes me back into that world.
Oh, I, as just a side here, when I think of sports specific, I think of those little, remember the cartoon character exercises that they had?
Oh, yeah. Those were great at the time, too.
Yeah, they're amazing and innovative. And we're like, wow, we have like a moving thing, and it could be, and it's kind of like AI at the time, I guess. But yeah, that's funny. And I think it really, and this is what I was referencing you with strengthcoach.com. It was a really a great, people like you that made the forum what it was, with this really good, healthy discussion without name calling. And I think that was kind of really the standard early on with what was going on there. It was just a lot of fun. And we all learned so much, not like what's kind of going on now. I love the term, you call it social media science. And I think today's topic, it's really relevant with what's happening, because there's so many places that we get information. I know you did say for one of your articles in the New Science of Back Pain article, which we'll have a link to as well, you were talking about, in the 90s, it's like the old man, we had to read books to, get our information. So, but right now it can be confusing and rightly so. I mean, if somebody has a lot of followers, you think, oh, maybe they're doing something right. And maybe we can learn from them. And I think we go down this rabbit hole with some of these things that we think one or two exercises is gonna solve all our problems, right?
Well, first off, thank you for saying I made those forums better and not worse. I'm sure it depends on the moment, the interaction of the day. Could have gone either way. But I think it was a different era too, where we were really, granted there were some significant disagreements at the time, but I think people generally respected each other's opinion and wanted to learn and so forth. And obviously it's got more polarized as people have tried to make their brands online bigger and bigger and bigger. And yes, we didn't read books in the day. We read cave drawings, I think it was. We depicted stuff from there. But yeah, it was funny when I was getting ready for this to talk to you, and my wife, who's a physical therapist, was kind of making fun of me because I'm going over some notes, I'm going over some research, and she's like, Josh, you've done so many of these interviews, you've written so many articles, you present some, why are you like getting a little crazy about this? I go, well, because this is both a personal topic and something I really want to make sure I accurately kind of reflect what the science actually says. Because it is challenging, and I am empathetic to the current fitness professional, strength coach, and therapists that maybe is getting in the industry in the last 10 years or so, where you and I got in the industry where social media really wasn't a thing. It didn't even exist. Now people are getting into that's the only world they know. Like that is the world. That's where you learn. That's where you get information from. And so it's really hard to have that filter to know if if someone's saying is true, or if is it partially true, is it just part of a bigger story? How much, truth is it to what they're saying, or are they misrepresenting the science? Are they cherry picking science? And that can get really overwhelming because, as you know, as a coach, that, coaches are generally busy. Therapists are busy, so they don't necessarily always have the time to sit there and break down all the literature that there is. So they try to rely on people to do it for them, and that can be a little bit dangerous. And something I always tell people is like, that's fine, like to acknowledge that you don't have time to read every research study there is, but if you're going to base what you do on research, you better read that research. At least read the research that you're saying you're basing what you do upon. So that's at least one thing that I wanted to make sure people really are aware of. And what I want to do is present the idea, like you said, that low back pain is kind of like the old Facebook status, like it's complicated, right? Nuance doesn't do well in our modern world, right? There's a lot of nuance when it comes to discussing low back pain because, yes, people hate gray. They want to be black or white. It's either this or it's that. And the reality, especially when you're talking about low back pain, is multiple things can be true at once. And that messes with people because that makes things more complicated to deal with. And I think what's really going to shock a lot of professionals is that we have a lot less control over people's pain than we may think. And so that becomes challenging too, but also freeing if we can learn to communicate that to the client more effectively as far as strategies that they can implement and educate them on what they may be experiencing with their pain. And, I think that's the baseline that I want to share with people because I think coaches often get frustrated and we get judgy with people that are dealing with chronic pain. And then when we get judgy, we lose empathy and compassion for those people. And they need our help and they want our help, and they may not know necessarily even how to go about, receiving that help appropriately themselves.
Love that. And I talk to younger trainers about that when you talk about getting judgy. I think it's just a reflection of how you feel insecure. Maybe you feel like, wow, this isn't working, right? So
Right.
I take it on myself and say, I might project that onto them, like this person's not doing the right thing, because I feel like I'm not doing the right job in getting them better. And to your point, there's so many things. I always like to say there's a lot of nails in that coffin, right? I mean, there's a lot of different. We're going to talk a little bit about this biological, psychological, and sociological, what would be called the biopsychosocial model in a little bit too. But when there's so many things, and it's the same thing with weight loss, right? I mean, if somebody has a bag of Doritos on the ride home, there goes your couple hundred calories that may be burned in the workout. And I think with back pain, especially, we're not medical, but for trainers, from the trainer perspective, we're not medical professionals, and we're trying to do everything we can. One thing I found amazing, and I knew the number was high, but you said in one of the articles, muscle strains and ligament sprains account for as much as 97% of back pain. That means that a rather small amount have actual spinal structural issues. And I do find that was a crazy statistic because you do hear a lot of people, I think a lot of people self-diagnose sometimes, like, yep, yeah, I went to the doctor, I got L4, L5 or something. There was no surgeries or anything, but they always kind of do this, and that's another thing with social media, the self-diagnose piece, right?
Oh, my wife gets driven by that because she daily gets people go, can you treat my knee, my back, my shoulder? And she's like, I can't do that over social media. No, I can't diagnose you. I can't treat you over social media. So no. But yeah, I mean, I think it's to your point about the young trainer too. And I've seen it in older trainers as well. It's like, yeah, we get frustrated because we think we have a system in place. We know how to fix low back pain. And when someone doesn't fit our system, we want to blame them. But it just might be we haven't found the right solution yet. We haven't found the right issue. And yeah, that stat about muscle sprains and strains and ligaments. I want to make sure I'm clear to everyone. It's not my stat. It's a stat.
Yeah.
It's not something
Yeah.
I made up. It's actually in the literature. And what's more shocking and goes along with that is that it's well documented that about 90% of low back pain is non-specific, meaning that there is no diagnosable relationship to any spinal issues.
Interesting.
Okay. And so that's really important. And so you have to understand a lot of doctors and a lot of insurance companies know this information too. So something I also want to like help trainers and coaches understand is we're not at war with the medical profession. We're in this together, right? Now they make mistakes, we make mistakes, but like we're all trying to help people. Now, what I think a lot of people don't understand because they don't go through the experience, and this is where my own personal journey has kind of helped me have perspective, is that doctors don't like look and go like, oh, and they, like you said, you have some L4, L5, but usually what and they end up saying is, but that doesn't seem to be causing your issue that you're describing to me, if they don't think it is. I think we get a lot of fitness myths, we got a lot of social media myths that doctors go in there and go, look at your L4, L5, you're about to die. That doesn't typically happen. Could that happen, I guess, as an outlier? Sure. But typically what happens is they'll go, look, we see some degeneration, or we see some change to L4, L5, but that doesn't seem very reflective of the symptoms you're describing.
Absolutely.
Okay? And because they know that 90% of low back pain is non-specific, they're not eager to do surgery. Because there's also a difference between acute and chronic low back pain. So acute low back pain is if something happens, you're in a car accident, I have pain. I'm in a sporting situation, I get hit, I have pain. Chronic is when you get to that 3 to 6 month period and you're still having pain. But what's amazing, so you and everybody's probably heard the stat that 80% of people in the US will experience low back pain, right? But what you don't usually hear is that about 90% of those people will resolve within that acute phase period with minimal interventions, meaning like anti-inflammatories, maybe some, lowering of the intensity of training or doing some, light physical therapy or stretching and so forth. It will generally resolve itself with minimal interventions. The challenging people are the people that become chronic. And that while statistically is a small percentage, about 5 to 10% of people, that's about 16 million people. And chronic pain is the number one cause of disability in the world. So we don't actually understand chronic pain very well. We're getting much better at it, but especially in the fitness and performance, and even I would say in some therapy aspects, we don't do a really good job of understanding chronic pain. And that's the type of pain I think most trainers are actually dealing with, because if you go and you like are in a car accident, chances are you're not going to your trainer to like look at your back.
Yeah.
That's typically not going to happen, right? You're typically going to go to your doctor first. So I just want people to understand that we usually don't discuss pain very well in our industry because there's such wide variances of what that means, whether we're talking about acute or chronic, or what type of pain that we're talking about. Are we talking about pain that like, oh, I get a little achy when I do this, or I can't get out of bed, right? There's such, and that's what's happening with social media. Everyone's like, oh, do this exercise and it'll fix your back pain. What back pain are you talking about? Are we talking about non-specific? Are we talking about someone with a disc herniation? Are we talking about someone with mild aches and pains that sometimes comes and goes? Or are we talking about someone who is barely able to function their daily lives? So that's why I say, like, we need to get much better at the conversation about what we mean when we're talking about back pain in general.
Yeah, and you had said, and we mentioned this earlier, that it's complicated, right? And because it's a combination of what you talked about in the 70s, doctors called the biopsychosocial model. Can we kind of expand on that and just kind of explain to people what that means?
So in the 70s, physicians, one of the New York universities and medical programs, I forget which one it was at this point, I apologize, came up with this idea that, our health and well-being is dependent upon our biology, our psychology, and our sociology. Now, it's that interplay of all three. Now, that might sound revolutionary at the time, but if you look at most Eastern movement systems like yoga, Qigong, and things like that, that's been the basis of those systems for centuries. In the Eastern philosophy, they don't separate mind and body. In Western mentality, we separate mind and body. So basically, it was a very nicely organized way of talking about mind and body interaction. And there's so much now science and neuroscience and pain science to back up that this is a very real thing, that if we don't take into account this, then we're not going to be able to appropriately address the issues that people are coming in with. Just as a quick example, just to show the impact. So they've done research on people with successive low back surgery. They found, so they did a study, and so what they did is they measured people basically on their childhood adverse experiences. So it's known as A.P.E studies. And so if you had like basically no childhood adverse experiences, you had about 85% success rate of lumbar surgery. If you scored 3 or 4 more childhood adverse experiences, no matter like same surgery, same, everything like that, you had a 15% success rate.
Wow.
So what's happening? And now there is so much more current literature showing that a lot of chronic pain, and actually not just chronic pain, but all pain, is determined by your brain. You don't have a foot sensor that goes pain, a hand sensor that goes pain. All pain is created in your brain. Now, what can happen is there can be issues that start to create a pain cycle where your brain actually learns to create pain around other sensations, and you get stuck into a chronic pain loop. And exercise can be a component of helping that, but it's definitely not the most probably important thing.
Yeah. And by the way, that
Yeah.
that doesn't mean it's in the brain that it's not real, right?
No, and thank you for pointing that out. Like, and that's one of the things that we have to be careful about communicating with people. If you tell people, oh, it's in your head, well, yes, literally it's in your head because your brain's in your head, but all pain is real. All pain is real. So again, I don't want people thinking like, oh, people are faking it, they're making it up, or things like that. Like oftentimes people with things like fibro and things like that get told that like, yeah, you're stressed out, but that's the reason. So they get made like that they're crazy. That's not real. No, it's real. Yeah. It's just a neural circuit issue in their brain.
Yeah. Can you just expand a little if you know, like when they said adverse child, what exactly did that mean? Like a divorce, a sexual abuse, whatever. I don't know what that would mean.
No. Those are some of them. Alcoholic parents, loss of a parent, emotional or physical abuse, things like that. You can go and look on the A.P.E studies. The A.P.E study is actually also used with people with obesity. People with obesity usually score high on A.P.E studies.
Interesting.
Which again, sort of like takes away the fact that we think it's all about discipline. Well, it's not all about discipline. Some people are dealing with a lot more than just, whether or not I want to eat a fatty meal or a bad meal or not. And so again, it alters how we maybe address and approach people if we understand that a little bit more effectively. That's not just quote unquote discipline, that there's a lot of psychosocial aspects of both obesity and back pain and so forth that complicate the situation quite greatly.
Yeah, and how much does where does current stress, fit into kind of that model? Because I feel like I have a couple clients where I talk to them a lot about, one owns a really big business, and she's the major part of. She runs everything, and she's kind of one of those entrepreneurs, almost like an E-Myth entrepreneur, where they try to do everything, and so she's also a triathlete, and I talk to her a lot about managing stress because she'll come in and she's always like, "Oh, thanks for adjusting that workout," because she thinks she's used to somebody kind of coming in and somebody beating her up because she's going to be doing a triathlon. And I kind of always kind of adjust it based on what else is going in her life. And I talked to her a lot about what else is going on in her life. So where does that fit in currently with either? So if somebody's, at a 0 or a 1 and they're fine with that, but then they deal with a lot of stress and they don't manage stress well, how much does that play into it?
It's basically everything. Just to give you like a crazy stat, they estimate about 90% of visits to a general practitioner now, a general physician, is stress-related symptoms. Where you're talking about IBS, you can talk about chronic pain, headaches, migraines. All these are related to chronic stress. And, like you mentioned, stress is going to happen in our lives, but it's when it becomes chronic and it becomes not managed well that it becomes a problem. Because think about this, Anthony, like what do people usually call cortisol? They call it the stress hormone, right?
Yeah.
That's not actually completely accurate. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's one of the top neuroscientists in the world, did a great presentation on this. Like she points out that actually cortisol is the get ready to do something hormone. Right. So when you first get out of bed, you're going to get a spike of cortisol right before you do a workout. You get a spike of cortisol because your body thinks you're about to do something.
Yes.
So when you feel chronic stress, what is your body constantly doing? It's getting ready to do something. But now in our modern world, we're not going to do something. We're just more reacting to situations or people or whatever it may be. So it starts to play with a lot of our body systems. It plays a lot with our neurology. So what ends up happening, that's where sensations that are kind of neutral or not that big of a deal can become into chronic pain, because emotions and physical pain are processed in the same areas of the brain. So that's what you say, like, it's not just chronic stress, but it's looking at someone's life history of stress. So, it's like example that's often given is someone grows up with, let's say a very argumentative parents, and it's very tense and very stressful, right?
Mm-hmm.
They grow up feeling the world's very unsafe and very unstable. And so, when they first get an interaction, maybe as a young adult, and someone hurts them or does something mean to them, they start to like get super stressed, and maybe they start having a little neck pain or something like that, because that's tapping into a neural circuit of unsafe, lack of safety. Because basically all pain is a danger signal. It's saying something is wrong. So if I give the analogy of your smoke detector in your house, if your smoke detector goes off, you don't know if your house is on fire or the toast is burned, right? And it's kind of the same thing when we're going with pain. And so all it's doing is going, something is wrong, but we don't know exactly what that is. And so it can be influenced a lot by chronic stress. And so, it's not really helpful either when coaches go, you should learn to manage your stress. Like, oh, thanks, genius. That sounds easy. Or what's worse is if you give people 20 strategies to try to deal with their stress, because that's what's going to stress them out more. Right. So it's finding, just a couple of things that might be impactful, or maybe even bring awareness. Like, here's the crazy stat with stress and back pain is they found that they did this 4-year follow-up study of almost 300 people. And they found that people who said they almost never enjoyed their job or hardly ever enjoyed their job were 2.5 times more likely to have back pain than people that said they almost always loved their job.
Wow.
Right. The same thing with personal relationships, right? If you're in an unhealthy, romantic relationship or family relationships or friendships, the same thing can happen, because Dr. Parrott points out, our brain is the most metabolically costly organ in our body. It takes about 20% of our metabolic cost. Okay. So how do we offset some of that cost is by social interaction, because we start to regulate each other's nervous systems a bit. Right. That's why social connection is such a big thing. People that are completely lonely die years earlier because of this, higher metabolic stress. But she has got a great saying: the best thing for a nervous system is another person. The worst thing for your nervous system is another person. Right. That's why, like, if you work with someone who, like, quote unquote, drains you, that literally is a drain. Like, your nervous system is getting stressed. If that person is doing it versus someone else might be uplifting to you. It might make you feel really good. So again, that's what we have to understand is, like, like you were saying, you were taking inventory, at least you were having at least awareness of your client's world. And I think that's a huge step, because finding out, hey, I feel like I'm in conflict with everyone at work. Well, that's a big stress, right? They found that workaholics were highly more likely to have low back pain than not, right? And it doesn't have to do with them sitting longer, things like that. It has to do with depression, anxiety, stress, and things like that. So it's a lot more impactful than I think we've ever given it credence for. And so it has to be part of the equation, at least in how we learn to communicate with people and educate people on these factors.
Yeah, it's interesting. In my lecture, Perform Better, the last couple of years, I was doing something on this information I got from a TED Talk that she was talking about a study, talked about longevity, and social integration was the number one factor for longevity. And so social integration is the people that you see every day, but you don't really, it's not your group. It's not your friends or your coworkers that you're like talking to. It's more of the mailman, like, hey, Joe, how you doing? Or the deli guy, or, you go to pick up your laundry and you might, maybe, the laundry at the dry cleaner, that person, whatever. And people you see on an elevator, whatever it may be, but it's really just those kind of quick hits. It makes sense. So you're not getting that bad energy from some of the people that you talk about.
Absolutely. And that's why it's always very careful. Like when people talk about boundaries and things like that, like those are real things that some people have to really examine if they're dealing with things like these non-specific chronic pain symptoms that can often be traced back to what's known as neuroplastic pain, which is basically the brain gets stuck in a pain cycle. And the worst part too is like, it doesn't always have to be non-specific. You could have had injury, and that injury sets the memory of pain, and all of a sudden you start to become a chronic pain person, even though the injury is healed. Like you've heard athletes all the time, they have a bad injury and then they healed and they're cleared and they're ready to go back, but they're hesitant to go back and use that body part and stuff like that. So when the body fears has that fear, it creates so Dr. Baird talks about the brain evolved not really to think. Like it can think, obviously, but it's more metabolically efficient to predict than it is to react. So the body is made to predict a lot, and it interacts a lot with and it's made to also organize and run the systems of your body. Because what happened is, as animals became more complex, the brains got bigger and more complicated to regulate these systems. Because who's regulating all the systems of your body that you don't even think about? So there's a constant interplay between the two, right? That's why now you're seeing that gut, H.P. access to the brain having an impact and so forth, or why there's so many neurons around the heart. Because there's this constant interplay between the brain and the body. And so the point being that if you start having a negative experience, for example, we're talking about low back pain here. If I at some point had a really bad experience where I bent over to pick up a pencil and my back just went out, and I just felt this horrific pain, my body is going to start to predict and start to relate trunk flexion equals pain. So even I could sit there and think about the movement, and some people will feel pain, because it's efficient. It's trying to save me, right? It's trying to make sure I don't get hurt. So that's called predictive coding. So we can actually break that, but people have to understand that it even exists. That people aren't trying to be difficult. If they're like, if they go, well, Anthony, I'd like to do that, but I'm scared of my back. They're not trying to be difficult with you. Something in their background says this is not safe. And the body thinks it's not safe, it's probably going to predict pain and cause pain, even though there may not be structural causes for that pain.
So you said in the article that by understanding how predictive coding works, researchers may be able to develop new treatments that disrupt these predictions or offer relief from chronic pain. I know it's going to sound stupid, but sometimes when I have a little bit of, whatever, tweak my back or whatever, I always talk myself into I say, well, deadlifts are, and I know I'm already trying to talk, deadlifts always make my back feel better. Like getting a good set of deadlifts makes my back feel better. Would there be anything to that, like retraining yourself to say, no, I do it when I'm sick all the time. Like if I'm starting to get sick, I say the same thing. I'm like, no, I don't get sick. I'm going to take, I'm going to have my tea before I go to bed. I don't get sick. No problem. I'm fine. Right. Is there something to that with the predictive coding, like what you said, with that we can start to develop treatments? Is there a way to figure that out? Or is that just really kind of?
No, it's actually, you're 100% on the right track. And there's actually science to prove what you're saying. So one of the research studies that kind of blew my mind as I was, the last several years of sort of going through things, was what's called the Boulder Back Study. Everyone needs to look at this study. This was published in JAMA, so the Journal of American Medical Association, a very reputable journal. The Boulder Back Study basically took people with chronic low back pain. They made sure that they were screened so they didn't have any structural damage. These were all people that had 10 plus years of chronic low back pain. So what they did is, in a 4-week period, they took them through what's called pain reprocessing therapy. This is kind of more along the lines of not necessarily psychotherapy, but kind of in that world. I'll explain it more if you want to. But basically what they found at the end of 4 weeks, 75% of the people were either pain-free or nearly pain-free. That's unheard of.
Wow.
In those types of studies. And people that have been in pain for 10 years or more with chronic pain. They didn't do any exercise. No exercise was involved. No therapy, like physical therapy. It was all this pain reprocessing therapy. And one of the biggest things about the pain reprocessing therapy is to help people understand how the brain works and to help them reduce their fear of the pain. So like you're saying, and they do gradated exposure to movements that maybe create fear. So in your example, you're like, okay, my back feels twingy, but I know deadlifts make me feel better. Now that's completely could be placebo. Like you know, which is not a bad thing. People think placebo is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah,
It's a great thing. It's a great
I'll
tool.
take it.
Oh, well, science actually says like we should be using more placebo.
Mm.
And that's why certain things that don't seem to make sense to some people work for some people. But like you're telling yourself by doing the deadlift, I'm safe. And when your nervous system and your brain start to go, I'm safe, then it turns off that you can break that cycle. And so what you're basically doing is you're using kind of a form of that pain reprocessing therapy. You're telling yourself you are safe and this is okay to do, and I'm no longer in danger.
Interesting.
And so they've had huge success rates, and they're funding now NIH, National Institute of Health, and all these are funding a lot more studies around these therapeutic techniques. And they're not like super psychotherapy, like you don't have to go deep into emotions or traumas. They're just basically what I just said. They're educating people on the neuroscience of how the brain works. They're teaching like this is what happens to your brain. The circuits become kind of like mixed up, and they start to misinterpret these signals. Then they try to teach people how to remove fear from whatever it is that they're having fear about, and then because a lot of people with chronic pain, they catastrophize a lot and they become hyper vigilant, meaning that they might think like, well, I don't want to do this because as soon as I get pain, well, then I won't be able to do anything today, and then I won't be able to go to work, and then my kids are going to be like, it spirals pretty fast, and that's all danger signals to the brain. That's all danger. So your pain gets worse and worse and worse. Hypervigilance is like, well, I'm so worried that like I don't know if I can go out to eat with my friends because what if I sit for a long time and like that I know that will hurt my back, and so like that's hyperventilation. You're always looking for the pain. That's danger signals again. So they try to get people to understand that you are safe. These are fear cycles. These are kind of patterns your brain has developed, and slowly help them understand how to break those cycles.
So that was the kinesiophobia that you were talking about?
Well, kinesiophobia is part of that. Kinesiophobia is what defined, and I hate this definition, as irrational fear of movement. I hate that definition because it's not irrational. Something's happened. Okay. Your brain's like, that sucked last time that we did that. Let's not do that again. Because your brain, your brain's always trying to protect you, and your body's always trying to protect you, right? So what they found is that actually exercise is not super effective for kinesiophobia. Even placebo treatments are generally more effective a lot of times, but there are certain movement systems that are effective. And that's why like these mind-body systems, old movement systems of yoga, Tai Chi, and Qigong have actually been shown to help things like kinesiophobia because of a lot of different reasons. If we want to get into it, we can, but a lot of it is regulation of the nervous system. Like I hate the term, I don't know if you've come across it a lot, Anthony, like people go reset your nervous system.
Yeah.
Your brain's not a computer. You don't turn it off, wait 10 seconds, and then turn it back on, and your nervous system's now all new. You can regulate your nervous system. That's completely different. So more people need nervous system regulation because when the longer you're in chronic pain, your brain actually changes structurally and chemically, where you will now actually have more negative preconceptions of things. You'll have less emotional regulation than before. So again, like literally personality traits change. And so it's like, again, things that people don't think about. And they think they have a client who's maybe not doing the 30 things they told them to do for their back pain. And they're wondering like, you don't want to get better. It's like, no, that's not it at all. Number one, you completely overwhelmed them. Number two, they're battling about probably 10 different things you didn't even think about, that maybe we should have addressed before we got to whether or not they should foam roll,
Yeah.
So it's complicated, like I said.
Is there, I know, I totally get that. But for someone listening who maybe has somebody with maybe a little bit a lower level of this idea of the kinesiophobia, or just afraid to do some movements, is there a strategy to try to get that person? If we are just talking to trainers who are working with general population who want to help somebody with some back pain and want to get to some of the movements that they feel like are important for other things as well. Is there any strategy to kind of say, to kind of talk them off the ledge? I don't know.
Sure. I mean, I think there's two ways that coaches can go about this. One is if someone comes in and people with chronic pain in general, and depending upon what their level is, now they're coming to you, they may still come to you, which is a huge action step on their part, but they still may have a lot of apprehension about what exercise, like maybe they've had negative experience with exercise in the past, or it doesn't have quote unquote worked. So one thing I want to know is like, are you fearful of all exercise? Or are you fearful of just some exercises? right? So sometimes if people are like, well, I don't like to squat and I don't like to deadlift, I don't like to lunge, maybe they think of knee pain when they think about lunging, right?
Yeah.
Then I don't need to do those right off the bat, right? There's other things I can do. And that's why I love some of these mind body practices that we can incorporate. And we've created a system to sort of simplify some of those systems for people because they have no preconception of what those are. And if I can teach them that movement doesn't have to hurt, if I can teach them how to regulate their nervous system, if I can teach them how to relax their bodies while they're moving, that might be a giant win to set the foundation to then getting them to learn progressively things that maybe in their past they've sort of written off as painful movements. The other thing to do is just do it super progressively, right? Like, so in that pain reprocessing therapy, they call it corrective exposure. So let's say I'm super scared to hip hinge. Maybe you have me hip hinge 2 inches with like a dowel rod, right? And during that time, it's kind of what you said with the deadlift. I'm telling myself, I'm safe. This is good. No problem. I'm safe. And if you do that enough times and they're not experiencing that pain, then you can progress it maybe like 4 or 5 inches, right? Yeah. And like have them do it's like, so it sounds silly, but there's neuroscience to back this up. Have them smile when they do it. Because that actually, and when they do functional MRIs of the brain, that changes some of that neural circuitry, right? So if you tell them like that mantra of I am safe is actually a thing to change that neural circuit too. So I am safe, they smile a little bit, you get great exposure. Because what ends up happening is that if you give them a negative exposure, it's not like a 2 to 1. Like if I do 2 corrective exposures and I do 1 negative exposure, meaning like they end up having pain, that those balance each other out. It's usually like I could do 15 positive exposures and 1 negative, and all of a sudden I'm back at square one, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be really careful with these graded exposures. So I think for one, it's finding movements they don't find fearful doing or they don't have that type of response in doing. And then it's giving very gradated corrective exposures to those movements that maybe they do have fear about. And I think it's also helpful too, like, everyone should be probably, if they've had significant pain, screened by a doctor first. I mean, and I know everyone, imaging gets a bad rap, but I think it's more about the communication about imaging. Because I mean, we have a mutual friend who had horrible back pain many years ago. I tried to help him, couldn't really help him find out that he had tumors in his spine. Right?
Yeah.
Well, only imaging is going to find that out, right?
Yeah.
And possibly end up saving his life to find that out when it did. So it's not that imaging is all bad. It's just how we communicate with that imaging, right? So if they're clear, if they come to the doctor and they're like, and you also want to watch for the telephone game, right? From their doctor, like, is that what your doctor actually said? Like,
Oh yeah.
like they hear L4, L5 is like bulging, but they like, did they say that was a problem or not? Like, you can follow up on that conversation. So assuming that the doctor goes, well, it's probably not a big deal, then you go, listen, your doctor said you're safe. Like, I don't want to make that diagnosis as a fitness pro or strength coach, right? But if the doctor's cleared you and said the doctor says you're safe to exercise, then you can reinforce that to the person. Tell yourself that this is safe and that we're going to start small. We're going to work within certain limits, right? And there's lots of evidence too that if you take the time to explain them how chronic pain works in the brain, that also helps. Like you said, it's not that you're making this up and this is all in your head. No, your brain has started to misinterpret signals and you're stuck in this cycle. Right?
Absolutely.
So they're like, okay, so I'm not making this up. This is all very real. And this is how we're going to break that cycle.
Yeah.
So those are 2 ways that I would definitely say coaches could go about sort of addressing these issues in a very practical way.
Yeah. The awareness piece is huge. I remember when I was a kid, I was like 22, I had an ulcer and I was awake for this procedure, but it wasn't a procedure, it was the camera, scope down your throat. And the doctor said, listen, when I do this and I go right when I get to your throat, you're going to gag. Don't freak out. If I did this while you were in a coma, you would still gag. It's a gag reflex. So just be calm about it and understand to try to relax. And if you relax, I can get the camera through and you'll be fine. And it was so amazing that it was a big lesson for me. Like, honestly, like in all my coaching, I'm always trying to be as transparent or talk to them about what's going to happen, because I felt like that was a huge piece for me when I learned. Like, so now I have to know everything when I go to the
Sure.
doctor. Like, all right, what's going to happen here? Well, I even did an MRI and I got on and I freaked out because they were just like, they put me down. Once I got down, the thing started moving. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You got to talk to me first. Take me out for, a steak dinner. Um, but so I really thought for me, that's a big thing. So when I'm coaching, I do always try to do that. But Josh, I want to kind of go into a little bit more practical, just to kind of
Yeah,
touch on
sure.
some of this stuff. Because I think, going back to what we talked about, with the social media science stuff, and we see, hey, these 2 exercises for your back, get these, your back, just work on your glutes and you'll be okay. Do these planks, whatever. Even with Dr. McGill, it's not all what Dr. McGill says, but the McGill big 3, right? Do these and your back pain's going to go away. We know that's not true. It's not always. Although that can help, and she pointed out some research on Dr. McGill's work in one of your articles that we're linking to. But you said that the research is now showing a lot of this stuff is largely myofascial, and that's been a big topic among fitness professionals lately. We had a couple coaches on here talking about fascia as well. Can you kind of explain to us that idea between looking at muscles and now looking at this idea about the fascia, including the fascia as well?
Sure. And I just always want to caution people too that it's one of those things we talked about at the beginning. It's multiple things. So fascia is a part of the equation because again,
Yes.
like you always run into danger if you're a fascial person, then everything's fascial based. If you're a breathing person, everything's breathing based, and so forth and so forth. Right. So I mean, there's a lot of good fascial people. So I don't want to say everyone, but like you can get trapped in those paradigms too.
Absolutely.
So what's really interesting. So last September, I got to go to a symposium by Harvard Medical School. Their symposium was on whole person health. So they actually did a whole 3-day symposium on basically what we're talking about, the biopsychosocial model and its impact upon multiple chronic diseases, cardiovascular, chronic pain, diabetes, fall prevention, all these things, cognitive decline. And one of the keynote speakers was a woman named Dr. Helene Langevin, and she's one of the biggest experts in the study of myofascial pain. And she presented some really interesting research. One was that they were finding that a lot of people with low back pain had a inability to have that thoracolumbar fascia. So if people can imagine, it's a bunch of connective tissue that almost be part of like your natural weight belt. Like it connects like to your transverse abdominis, connects to your lats, to your glutes, and all those things. It's to help stabilize your spine a lot. But they weren't getting a lot of movement of that sliding of that fascia. And that when they did, and then when they repeatedly stretched it and they got better mobility, that pain went away. So that's like one of those things. And so what's happening too, and that's what I said, multiple things can be true at once. What they find is like when people aren't physically active, they're not moving enough, your fascia can actually change its structure. So if you think about like, I broke my arm, right? I'm immobilized for 8 to 12 weeks. And then the first time you try to move your arm, it feels stiff, feels hard to move. Like that's actually some structural changes going on in that connective tissue. So what they're finding is that like, that's why movement is so important. That's why, when people say, oh, I haven't moved for a while and they get up and then the first thing they want to do is what? They want to stretch, right?
Yes.
And animals do the same thing. If
Sure.
you watch, like, you have a dog, and, I have dogs, like the first thing when they wake up and the cat, like they stretch, it's sort of that innate response that I want to start getting that elasticity. And we know as we get older too, we lose a lot of that elasticity naturally, but we can sort of reduce that loss if we're more active and physically moving. Now, I think what's important in that is that, again, it doesn't have to be necessarily doing deadlifts, power cleans, kettlebell swings, things like that, that we need to broaden our mind on what that means. For example, there was really interesting research that Tai Chi was very effective for increasing thoracolumbar fascial movement. So that's not something that most coaches would default to like helping with some of these issues. And there's also, things with yoga and other practices that also help with some of these issues as well. So it's also that none of these fascial systems work in isolation. That's the whole point of the fascial web concept, is that they're all interacting. But you can imagine that if I'm losing elasticity in one area, I'm going to compensate probably at another. And what's actually really fascinating, if you want to think about it, is there's research that goes, so they looked at the relationship between myofascial trigger points. So I think everyone knows what trigger point is, right? Like you press in the area and maybe it refers to other places that can hurt right there. There is a 91% correlation between myofascial trigger points and traditional Chinese meridians.
Wow.
So it's almost like the ancients knew a lot more about the body. So that's why they think like acupuncture has a lot to do more with fascial changes than anything else, than muscular or anything like that.
Okay.
And there's interesting research to kind of support that concept that there's actually fluid and material in between the fascia and the muscle that it can impact as well. That they've even done multiple experiments where they'll put dye into like some of these meridian points, and they'll actually see it track the specific meridian points. So these,
Wow.
I know some people online like to argue these aren't real, and you don't have to care about them. These are real, and you probably should care about them, because if you can't move, if the elasticity gets removed, then it definitely has been shown to cause pain and other problems, and even things like inflammatory can cause increased inflammation. There's all these. Dr. Langevin did all this interesting explanation about also cancer development, tumors, and things like that. So it gets complicated fast. But as far as the professional needs to know is that if your client hasn't been moving a lot lately, then they actually can feel stiff and tight. And it's not just because they're lazy or they're apathetic or whatever these things. It's like they could actually have some of this elasticity that they've lost. And so maybe our priority is restoring some of that elasticity through more generalized movement, right? Not being so hyper specific upon certain exercises. So I think that's one way to do it. We also know that neurologically, if we can tone down this, you were talking about the stress response. Well, if we're super stressed, what are we going to do with our muscles and stuff? We're going to tighten up.
Tighten up.
So if we can also teach people how to relax and be soft, then they are more likely to be able to open up into these different, get that elasticity at a higher level, or improve their elasticity than if they're trying to do it in a very rigid state. That's why, like, people need to be careful, like when you're doing a stretch or doing foam rolling, like they're not listing this big grimace or like it's the most painful experience that someone's ever had, because the nervous system, that's pain. Pain is danger. I'm going to shut it down. Or I'm going to try to protect myself. So we always want to find like where people can, that's where like breath work is helpful, and breathing comfortably, where they can get into movements rather comfortably, so that they realize they can relax and soften, so they can get that elasticity back.
Josh, you were showing on this topic, you were showing a great video about some things that can kind of open up that that area, right? And the thoracolum. I can never say that word.
Thoracolumbar fascia. There's some ones that get me every time too.
Yeah. So and they were I'm assuming it was Tai Chi, right? Was that Tai Chi pretty much like based off of a lot of Tai Chi moves, or was it Qigong as well? Or?
So I've been for the last 4 years been doing practicing Tai Chi myself.
Okay.
I've also been doing some yoga with a colleague of mine that's a really good yoga instructor. And I realized one thing was like, unless you deliberately want to learn these systems, which they're fantastic systems,
Yeah.
like you're not going to get it by just doing a movement. So what I wanted to do is borrow concepts and principles from all these systems and sort of create something that a fitness professional strength coach could utilize, because they're all a lot deeper than just doing the movement. So if we can sort of help coaches start to see that process in a different way, then they're all based upon, I would say the big three of like yoga, Tai Chi, and Qigong, and those are all different. But yeah, they're all ways, and what I liked about them is they're all multiplanar, all integrative. They integrate breath work, nervous system regulation, stability, and balance. And when you combine a lot of this, you're checking off a lot of boxes on things that can improve our movement and reduce chronic pain. So one of the things that drew me to these systems were they all have a good amount of history of helping chronic pain symptoms, especially low back pain. Now, not universally, because nothing shows universally to work, because as we've already described, there's multiple factors that go into that. But they have a good track record of helping a lot of these chronic symptoms.
So my part of my second part of the question was going to be really, seeing some of these, and I think it, like you said, it's complex. I mean, even first watching the videos, I'm like, wow, I can't just watch these videos. I need to sit there, and then I know I'm not going to get them right away based on the breath, because the breath seemed to be super important. Is it really? I'm not saying I know in the beginning. Do I need to get the breath exactly right for this to be? So if I'm doing some of these movements that you were showing, and I'm not getting the breath exactly right, the exhale right on the perfect on the movement up, and the exhale on the way down, Is that, can I just make sure that they're breathing right? We're getting some really good diaphragmatic breathing, et cetera, et cetera. Or is this not good unless I'm really getting the whole piece of it?
No, I'm so glad you asked that question, Anthony, because that's actually what kind of turned me off from breath work at first, was like people trying to make it super dogmatic, and it's not really. It's not supposed to be that dogmatic. So I've been fortunate to meet some excellent instructors. Like my Tai Chi teacher is from the lineage of the family that started Tai Chi in China. So she says the same thing as my yoga friend who does a lot of trauma-based yoga from the military. No, you don't have to get the breath exact. It's just being aware that there's a breath. Like first, they always focus on the movement first, because the more efficient you get the movement, the more you can tap into that breath in a relaxed state. If you're really stressed about the movement, you're never going to be able to tap into the breath. So it always goes movement, breath, mindfulness. That's kind of the track. Okay. So let's get the movement down. Just be aware, like just try to have natural, they often say natural breath. They don't even say diaphragmatic, just have a natural breath.
Yes.
Right. So you're not holding your breath. And then once you get the movement down, then we introduce a diaphragmatic breath. And then maybe we get the breath a little bit more timed with the movement because it'll make it more efficient. And then we introduce more mindfulness, thinking about more of how you're using the body, how you're horning everything, things like that. So it's definitely a progressive system. And that's like, it's super hard, like in this day and age of social media, to like explain all that in a post that you want people to understand. But yeah, the foundation is getting the movement down first, because that will be the baseline for getting everything else to be more effective and better.
It's funny because I think when I first started, I think Charlie Weingroff and I went down to Todd Wright's facility and for his mentorship. I think it was 2010 or 11 or something. And one of the things I really took away was his lunge matrix and split stance matrix and lunge matrix. And, was kind of doing, a movement in a split stance or a lateral stance or a rotational stance with what they would call arm drivers, right? And so moving, that lower body was moving in one plane, upper body was moving in another plane, side bending, and kind of reminds me of almost like a good progression to some of the stuff that you were going over, but maybe that kind of Gary Gray lunge matrix type of stuff, and note that there wasn't any weights involved. So for this part, it would be a good progression. I think the one thing I never really did was the breathing and the mindfulness while they were doing it. I might have been doing it and thinking it in my head, but I feel like you need to take a step back first and to go over some of the stuff that you were talking about.
Yeah, and what's funny that you mentioned that is because like when my wife and I were first dating, like one of the things that, this is how dorky we are, that bonded us. It was like 20 years ago. It was like I saw like in her apartment that she had Gary Gray videos, like the VHS videos. I'm like, oh, you're a Gary Gray fan? And
she's
like,
a keeper.
Like, yeah, right. That's sad, right? But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of relationships there. Like, and what I try to do, and knowing Gary's work and these other movement systems, was to help sort of bring it to a little easier methodology today. So what we call our system is myofascial integrated movement. Number one, because you need a term that has 3 letters in it. Ram Malani was very adamant that if you go to 4 letters as an acronym, it doesn't work as well. 3 MIM. But it was to basically like, because a lot of these movements don't fit into our current paradigm of like movement patterns over like squat, lunge, hip hinge, push, pull. So like people are like, well, where does this go into? I'm like, it doesn't really fit any of these things because it's more complex movement. And so it's like, oh, let's base this more on kind of thinking about, I call it highlighting the different myofascial slings, because you can't isolate them. They all are working, but I like highlighting them. So like, a certain movement highlights, because if you look at something like Qigong, for example, there's 3,000 different forms of Qigong. So it's like, which one do you pick, but there's elements that we can pick up to then systemize. And like I said, and one of my things I want to do this too was like, these ancient systems were based upon people that weren't so sedentary. So, I mean, a bigger challenge nowadays is when you're taking people that, have health issues, that have physical limitations, or coming off of injuries, or just don't move very well. And then like, how do you teach them how to move, in a progressive manner with more efficiency? Because that's what I see a lot of these different movement systems doing, is they're teaching movement efficiency. My teacher's 70 years old, and she would put to shame probably every Perform Better speaker in her ability to move. So it's like, there's something to this. if we pay attention enough. I'm not saying do this exclusively. Some people may, that's fine.
Yeah.
But like you said, I think I want to systemize it in a way that made more sense to the modern coach. And also I didn't want to make it overly complicated where you're like looking at this, like, I can't even see how this fits into my training.
Yeah. 100%. And I felt like great part of a warm up, great way to kind of, like you talked about, almost talking people off the ledge, like through these nice, easy movements. Wow, this feels really good. When I was looking at that, that was like that's what kind of the light bulb that went off in my head about that. I want to just segue all this into while we're talking about like the different muscles and fascia. Take a step back from we really we had a period there of it was all about core stability, right? And one thing that was talked a lot about is core stability and anti-rotation idea. And I want to kind of get your thoughts on where we are now with this, because the pendulum swings very far, and it has, and now it's kind of seemed to be going the other way. You talked about this. If you become popular and you're a researcher, you'll eventually be called outdated, and that's kind of what happened with Stuart McGill recently. A lot of people are saying his stuff is old and doesn't work and whatever, it's outdated, wrong, it doesn't it's stupid, whatever. Can you just talk to us about where core stability and fits in, and your thoughts on the whole anti-rotation idea?
Sure. And I think it's kind of funny, just to talk about what you're referencing, that specific quote. So there was someone who was responding to, I was talking about, some of the anti-rotational stuff and said, oh, this is super outdated, blah, blah. You need to look into so-and-so. And I know who that person is, and I know what they base their stuff off of. And it's funny that McGill would get called outdated, but this person references theories that are from the 80s and older. So I'm like, not sure how that's current.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes people identify with a very controversial figure and they don't know what they're basing their methodology on, but because they're new to them, then this must be innovative and cutting edge, where really all they're doing is reciting very controversial old research that was never really confirmed. And if you go down, the idea, so there are a lot of people that are buying into the spinal engine theory from the 1980s, which if you trace back the origin of that theory, came about through watching lizards move. So lizards would shift their body around a lot as they perform locomotion. And then when you see infants move, they do a little bit of something similar, right? And then they watched a double amputee move, and they move their hips around a lot. Well, they don't have any legs. That was the basis of this this theory. That's still a very controversial theory among many biomechanics experts. So I think it's funny that people will buy so hard into that just because they want to be different, maybe, or contrarians. I'm not sure what it is, or they don't know the history of some of these philosophies that are being shared now, because you've been around long enough, things get recycled in different formats and forms. So I think the anti-rotational stuff ultimately, well, let me get to the core stability first too, because that's gotten misunderstood. Because now that neuroscience that we talked a large amount about has come about and become more prevalent, I often joke with friends like our industry can't have anything nice. Because now that that's coming about, people are like, see, core stability is stupid. It's all this neuroscience, right? I'm like, well, it can be both.
Yeah.
Right? It can be both things. And so people are like, oh, there's no evidence that core stability helps low back pain. Well, there's actually quite a bit of literature that says it can. Now, does every single study show it? No. But that's based upon the multiple factors, the type of pain you're talking about, what core stability exercises were used, and maybe what the symptoms were for the individual. So maybe some individuals didn't have a core stability issue. So that's something you should be assessing or screening to see if that's even an issue that needs to be addressed. If you're talking about back pain, or if you think that's going to be a solution for their back pain. I think it gets complicated that, yes, it could be all the neuroscience, and it could be bad that you have poor core stability. So you get excessive movement when you do everyday activities that put excessive stress in your body. So you get those muscle strains and ligaments that we were talking about before. So it can be both things. So I think what happened is people thought they were doing the right core stability exercises, quote unquote, and they weren't getting people better, but didn't realize it could have been the progressions, the versions. Maybe it was just the type of pain people were having. There's multiple factors, but you can't say core stability has no impact on low back pain. There's too much literature to say that it can be a factor, right?
Yeah.
as far as the anti-rotational stuff goes, I think people misunderstand a lot of Dr. McGill's work. Like when he talks about super stiffness, he's not talking about people walking around like a mummy, right? Like you're super stiff all the time walking around like a mummy. That's never what he's talking about. He's more talking about at a certain point, you need to create stiffness in a very reflexive manner to control.
Pulsing.
Pulsing, right?
Yeah.
But you need it for that really brief moment.
Yes.
Not walking around all day with it. And so it's like, I like what Dr. Abraham Marcelo talks about with stability training. Stability is the ability to allow wanted movement and resist unwanted movement.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
So if you're doing, the reason you're doing anti-rotational movement is not so you never get rotation, it's so that you can control how much rotation you produce. Right? If I can't control how much rotation I'm producing, then if I create excessive rotation, then I could have issues at the lumbar discs, the lumbar segments, the nerves, even the ligaments and the muscles, right? So if I can't resist all that force, because you look at when most injuries happen in acute, it's like Coach Dose talks a lot of injuries happen in deceleration or inability to resist unwanted movement.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to a lot of people. So it's not that we never, ever create rotation. We just want to set the foundation of how much rotation are we going to be able to control and create. But if you've never done any of that, then it makes sense to teach people progressively first how to resist rotation, then how to produce rotation, right? To me, it's just like, well, it's like someone saying, I can't believe, Anthony, that in teaching people calculus, you ever teach them addition and subtraction first. How dare you? That's so outdated.
Good point.
Right? Well, if I don't know how to add and subtract, how in the world am I going to do calculus? Right? They don't realize how sophisticated like movements like rotation are. Therefore, the average person doesn't know how to control their core. Well, they're probably going to create excessive movement and then potentially set themselves up to have problems, right?
Absolutely. Good stuff. Well, we could go on for
I know that. One thing my wife feels bad about for you, she goes, "Oh, he can talk, Anthony."
Yeah. This isn't our first rodeo.
Yeah.
Now let's go over like I said, we could talk a lot about this, but I just even reading those two articles was super informative. Again, we're gonna have links to that, but you're gonna be doing a webinar with Perform Better on June 11th, similar title, The New Science of Low Back Pain, what we've been talking about today. And then that's going to lead into your 6-week online masterclass. Tell us about what this masterclass is going to be. Is it going to be live lectures? Is it going to be a lot of, is there going to be homework? What is this going to be?
So we lead off the 6 weeks. So the webinar is part of the 6 weeks, and that's where we will lay the groundwork of the science. So we go over everything and more that we talked about today in great detail. So people understand they have that perspective upon appreciating what the practical application is going to be like and why we're focusing upon these things. So that'll be the first week. So what we decided was like, it's so hard nowadays to get people for live events, whether it's because of time or scheduling or travel and things like that. We just want to bring education to people. So what we've been doing several of these master classes. They've gone very well on a variety of topics. So we do an hour, it's actually longer than an hour, but we do an hour of teaching and practical application on different subject matters that are related to the topic. So when we're talking about low back pain, we're going to go over things like the neuroplastic pain, the neuroscience, like application, like things like somatic tracking and mindfulness. But we'll also go over the new science on core stability, mobility, strength, and stuff like that, and like how to apply that into a program. Then we can spend a good 30 minutes after each session answering any questions. So we open ourselves up, my wife and I, to like, anyone can answer a question if they've been using some of the material and that hasn't gone well, or how do you use this, or whatever question they may arise. We spend a good 30 minutes after that hour. And the best part is that people can't make those live sessions. They're all recorded. So everyone, whether you make the live session or not, gets the access to the recordings forever, unless I disappear off the face of the planet and we just don't keep the account anymore, which I'm not planning on. But people get to keep these videos and reference them over and over again. We give them little PDFs of what we covered that day with some cueing and stuff like that, just so they can quickly reference if they want without having to watch the entire videos. But we've been doing that for a price of under $100 for people for the 6 weeks. So that breaks down to a really inexpensive weekly educational environment. We also giving NASM, continuing education units. Just in order to keep the cost down, we can't do every association, but people can apply and get approved for these associations if they want. But we've been doing NASM, which has been very generous. I think it's about 0.8 CUs for the course. So that's pretty significant for people that are looking for continuing education as well.
Very cool. We will have a link for that at strengthcoachpodcast.com too. So Josh, thanks for coming on. I mean, really, we wanted Jess on, but
I know. Much better to look at too.
Exactly. But we appreciate you coming on and going over over delivering as you always do, and going over some of this stuff with back pain. I think it's fascinating, and it's always going to be relevant because, like you said, what was it? 80% of the people have back pain. 20% are liars. And I love that one. But really appreciate you coming on today and talking about this stuff. And we're going to keep everybody posted about that masterclass coming up. So, Josh, thanks for doing this, bud.
Anthony, thank you so much for the platform and the time. I really appreciate it.
All right, that's going to do for episode 381 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Guys, the show notes are located at strengthcoachpodcast.com. Don't forget, you can try strengthcoach.com out for 7 days for free, as well as NBSC.TV. 7 days for free. Special thanks to Chris Parrier and the folks over at Perform Better. The summits are here. Chicago's next, June 27th to the 29th. LA, August 1st to the 3rd. And Providence, August 22nd to the 24th. Check out my interview with Chris Parrier about the new format, including new presenters, the kickoff session on Thursday, and a new networking and Q&A session all day, along with no more Sundays. All right, check it all out at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Josh Henkin for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning and performance enhancement and back pain. Don't forget, Josh has a new 6-week course with his wife, Jessica. They're doing it in conjunction with Perform Better. It's called Low Back Pain, Pelvic Control, 6-week online masterclass. You don't want to miss this. I think it's only like $99. You can get all the info from the link at strengthcoachpodcast.com. Thanks to Sumit Seth and Naamly, helping build relationships through personalized communication so your members stay longer and pay longer. Check out the show notes for a couple of goodies that you can get from Naamly. That's going to do it for this episode. My name's Anthony Renna. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.